Whale. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. We have already adopted the agenda, and there's a motion to approve the minutes from the. Oh, that's the wrong one. There is no motion to approve the minutes. We are on number 3.1, Affordable Housing Program Update and Direction. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Gary Buxton, General Manager here, and I have Devon Cronshaw and Katie Wiseman from Macola Development Services who've been helping us sort of move the affordable housing program forward. So today we've got an update and acceptance of the final report, dealing with the funding that we've got from BC Housing, providing some contract extension motions, and then discussing an RFP for project management services. And we have brought sugary treats so you can get your blood sugar back up. Courtesy of Macola, so feel free to help yourselves. My assistant will pass them around.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your names. Devon and Kaylee. Kaylee. I thought it was Katie.
No worries.
Well,
Okay.
Just make sure there's one of those left. Thank you.
all right, over to you.
Thank you. So we've got $100,000 we had $100,000 in the 2017 budget allocated to affordable housing program development. This is largely the end of that. The final report sort of wraps that project up. We did issue an RFP last year. Macola did win that project, and we've been working with them since that time, both on the policy and with CHP Architects on preliminary design for the project at Buckley Avenue. We did initially have a Valleycliff site on the docket as well, but we've placed that on hold due to significant riparian restrictions on that site. So previously, councils looked at a policy and operations analysis report that was presented back in the fall and approved by council on November 28th with a number of recommendations that it made. I won't go through these in any detail. And then following November 28th, Macola made a project development or PDF fund application to BC Housing. Subsequently, we found out we've been successful on that. And they've also made further grant applications to CMHC for seed funding and for further research and education. And lastly, Council had an update on the purpose and intent of the Buckley project on January 23rd, which now brings us to where we're at with the current project. So Devon, Kaylee?
Sure. Yeah, so as introduced, I'm Devon, and I my role on the project was primarily the research lead, so I did a lot of the background research and compiled the report, so definitely appropriate for me to speak on those things. So this presentation will give a little bit of an introduction and work to date that we've completed on the 3 reports and spinning into this last report, and then take you through a little bit of the affordable housing program that we've come up with, as well as the organization. And I think at some point Gary will step in and do some next steps and go through some other items. So of course the purpose of the affordable housing program, as always from the very beginning, was to forward in action the recommendations of the Housing Task Force final report, and this sort of outlines at a high level the stages that we went through and is included in the final report as well. And then the purpose, of course, to provide direction and foundational policy for the district's new affordable housing program. So to start, the report is presented in 2 primary sections, the first being the affordable housing program and the second being the proposed housing organization. So I'll just take you briefly through both those pieces. So first, the affordable housing program. So we have split that into 2 key sort of pillars, the first being the comprehensive affordable housing policy, which the purpose is to encourage and facilitate the creation of affordable housing in the district. So the idea here is including a range of policy tools within the district's authority to implement to reduce financial barriers and expand opportunities for affordable housing in the district. So that's the one pillar. The second pillar is the perpetually affordable housing policy. The purpose of that is to address how the affordable units are managed to ensure perpetual affordability. So this establishes a number of policies / bylaws with the goal to ensuring affordability and is defined and respected to the local conditions and context in the creation of new affordable housing units. So the second piece was a proposed Squamish housing organization. So this was introduced in the second report and built out a little bit further in this final report. And the options and recommendations for the housing organization was informed through research and discussions with other municipalities and housing management entities. So as I'll introduce in the next slide, that included, of course, the Whistler Housing Authority, Capital Regional Housing Corporation, there are a few others as well. Experiential knowledge of the Macola Group of Societies, so ourselves in Macola Development Services and Macola Housing Society as well. We do have some background experiential knowledge in that as well, and engagement with local and regional social service providers. So this is where we've outlined the options analysis, which is included in that final report as well. So it identifies 3 options. Option 1 being a new legal corporation, example given Capital Regional Housing Corporation. So established under the Business Corporations Act, would be a wholly owned subsidiary of the district, and this option offers increased flexibility for financing and partnerships and agreements. Option 2 is the new non-profit society approach. Example, think the Victoria Coalition to End Homelessness. So this would be established under the Societies Act. District becomes more of a supportive or participatory role, but as well becomes potentially a director or member of this created society. About this option offers less flexibility for financing and partnerships and agreements, and again, the district would be more of a supportive or participatory role. And then the third option, the existing nonprofit society. So the example given is Macola Housing Society in Courtenay. When we can go into a little bit more detail about that, but the district to partner with an existing society, the mechanism there would be a partnership agreement under the community charter. Again, less flexibility for financing and partnerships agreements, and the district would be more of a supportive participatory role with an existing society in the district. And from the research that we've done, our recommendation is option 1, the new legal corporation, and we can get into more specifics about that as well in the discussion. So I think Gary, if you want to take the next
Sure.
step.
So the next steps, I mean, the report's clear. The recommendation is for a corporation. From staff's point of view, I don't think we're quite at the point that we're definitively ready to make that recommendation to council. There are potentially some administrative impacts, financial impacts, timelines and legislative issues that we would like to deal in more detail before we make that final determination, sort of build out the financial, legal and social impacts of those, look at cost accountability and governance structures of potential options, and then forward a recommendation to that in the near future, and then move quickly on that. And that has become apparent with the BC Housing funding and final project commitment.
That's right, yeah.
We're going to have to need that. We're not quite sure exactly what BC Housing will want, but we are going to need to have that substantially answered and probably operational in some way to get the construction financing from BC Housing. So there is a bit of a timeliness issue. Some of the options, such as a corporation, take some time to set up, so that does weigh into the equation. So we feel that there's a little bit more work to do on making a decision on the organisation, particular organisation.
Is it less time to reconfigure our existing corporation than to make a brand new one?
Maybe Ms. Arthurs is a better.
Existing corporation is in SSC? No, it's probably close to the same amount of time because we have to amend the articles and then send them over to the ministry to have them approved. So either or. So we either create articles, send them over, or have our lawyer amend the articles and send them over.
And you're saying that's equal work?
It's about the same amount of time. It falls in the hands of the ministry. So we're
No. Okay, I understand the same amount of time the ministry's got to process
Yeah,
it, but
same.
from the amount of work, we're not redoing articles, we're adding in housing to, I'm simplifying it, but we're adding housing to what SSC could
Right.
do. Instead of rewriting the whole thing, wouldn't that be more efficient, more time?
That part of it would not be the time suck, no. That would be an easy.
Okay, thanks. Done?
Yeah, there is no restriction on what a company can do. It's different from a society. So a company can run a gas station if it wants to. It would be a municipal...
Marijuana dispensary?
Or that. It would be a municipal corporation though, and there are special requirements of the ministry related to municipal corporations beyond the Business Corporations Act. And I looked into that for SOBC when I was on the audit committee. And unfortunately, at that time, SOBC was offside in about a dozen different requirements from the ministry. So there's more ministry reporting for the municipal corporation than there is with just the basic corporation that just reports to the county's office. So it could go either way. I mean, when I looked at that issue, I was wondering what the difference in flexibility was for financing and stuff, and nothing could come to mind. And I wonder, if I might, could you give me an example of that? Like what differences would be for a corporation versus a society going for financing a housing project?
Sure. So Devin can speak to maybe a couple concrete examples, but a nonprofit society, there'll be restrictions and some more flexibilities, right? So it's weighing out those options. So a nonprofit society will be better positioned, I would say, overall for accessing publicly funded or financed projects and programs. You'll be better positioned for other partnerships with other nonprofit societies or similar entities as well. There's a bit more flexibility in that side. You'll potentially access some better rates as well on the financing side as a nonprofit society, but it also will limit you, I guess, in the future what you could do with that entity and how it may hold assets and whatnot as well. Can you give something, maybe an example of the two?
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of an example, so the Capital Regional CRD actually has sort of both in a form. So this CRHC, the Housing Corporation that works there, and then as well the Coalition to End Homelessness. So I mean, those two models look fairly similar, and I think the scope for the next report would definitely look into more of those opportunities and limitations, but whereby the district is more maybe just, again, a participatory member of a society that brings together a lot of different partners. That has its advantages, but the corporation does, I think, in a legal sense, offer the most flexibility on that end. So,
And that's what the Worcester Housing Authority is.
yeah.
Corporation?
It's a corporation
Yes.
that's wholly owned by the municipality.
I think our concerns around the corporation really are, I mean, Matthews has some concerns about long-term financial implications, but really at this point in time, it's the timelines required to set it up. Having said that, there are hybrid options whereby we might want to start with one of these and move towards one of the others over time. If time is the issue in getting to the desired solution, if there might be an option to set up one and move to the other in that situation. But I say, we think that there's a piece of work here to be done to provide us some greater detail and greater assurance, and then we can ask council to make that final decision about which direction definitively to choose.
But it seems to me, well, we'll get to the discussion, but it seems to me that the recommendations were with Arm's Length Corporation. We have an Arm's Length Corporation. We're not setting up a new one. We don't need to. And one of the reasons why we've kept SSC for this long is we want to see if potentially it had a function like this. At least that was my intent. So I'm trying to understand why you think it's going to take a long time to set up a corporation where we haven't set up.
Again,
I mean, structurally and organizationally, that's another thing, but actually to set up a corporation, there you have it. Anyway, I'm sorry, we got too far down the conversation, but...
So let's come back to that maybe when we're done, try and get through the, through the presentation. On the other side, there is a little bit more work to do on both the comprehensive affordable housing policy and then the
Perpetual affordability. Perpetually affordable housing policy.
Yeah. So there are those two policy pieces that essentially need carrying across the finish line. You can see boilerplates of them. They're not going to be substantially different to that, but the details will be fleshed out. Having said that, the perpetually affordable bylaw policy, there is quite a bit more work in getting that across the finish line, principally around we're going to need a detailed needs assessment in the community to polish that off. So that would be part of the work program. So. Okay.
So just to give everyone a bit of a warning, we do have a school group, a spring break school group that wants to come in and just check out what we're doing and say hi to council. So we may get kids wandering in here, and I may recess the meeting for a minute just to say hi.
These are the folks that were trying to build affordable housing for you.
Exactly.
I hope it doesn't take that long, Gary.
With me here.
Okay.
They're small teenagers. So on the bright side, we have got $145,000 in project development funding from BC Housing through a promissory note, which is a forgivable loan. We don't have, unless we cease the project, the funds are ours, and we can carry on until the project's either completed or BC Housing, if they choose not to fund it, we don't have to repay these funds. And we anticipate that this is one of a series of sets of funds that will get us through to the completed the design phase, and then we can go for final project commitment with BC Housing. So on good news, we have that. In terms of the project work, we're proposing that the policy work and the organisational development work, that's the corporation or society, that we execute through contract extension with Macola. That's consistent actually with the policy discussions we had this morning on the purchasing policy, that when we have consultants that have carried the ball so far, it makes sense to continue to allow them to do that. The RFP that we did issue did anticipate that there would be further work, so I think we're on side completely in that regard. With the Buckley Avenue design, we're proposing an RFP for project management. So if you want to skip to the next. Because that's the coordination of all of the professional consultants involved, both through design and through construction. So it's a 2-year plus piece of work. You do not want to have a project manager work on the design and a separate project manager work on the construction. That would make no sense, even though they can be seen as two separate pieces of work. It doesn't make any sense at all to sort of parcel that up. So it's really, it's an expensive, substantial piece of work. It's probably closer to $450,000. So we will be issuing the RFP for that, and part of that project management role is to competitively tender all of the subcomponents, whether it's the construction management, that's the role that deals in detail with the general contractor day in, day out and argues with them about what they should or shouldn't be doing. Architecture service, cost consultants, legal services, and all of your civil, mechanical and all the other PNGs that work on the project. So it's a huge piece of work. Budget for it, the policy work and the organisational development work come from our operational budget in 2018, the Affordable Housing Programme coordination, which I think would carry forward is probably closer to 95,000. And then the Buckley Avenue design, those funds would come, or the expenditures would come out of the PDF funds. I think that's
Awesome. So thanks very much. Welcome to our guests. Nice to see you guys. I guess this is part of school break curriculum at Brennan Park, or?
Our Brennan Park Spring Camp.
Wonderful.
Organized the Community Day. We're coming out into community.
Nice.
This is a bonus. We didn't really get that.
Yeah, no, it's great. Welcome. So we're actually in the meeting right now, and we have meetings completely open to the public. So if you guys ever don't want to play, we have questions. Jason.
So I read through the report, and it looks pretty good as far as having some good concrete numbers. Two things I was wondering about is, number one, in the perpetual affordable housing income limits and rental rates, it only indicates a maximum monthly rate. So I was wondering if there was a reason for that, or if typically when it gets refined, there'll be more like a range. And also, secondly, was wondering, and more just maybe a word of caution and recommendation for the next stage, but I know that the report talks a lot about density bonusing, and I'm just curious as to, you might want to take a deeper dive around what our existing zoning is, because unlike a lot of other municipalities, we don't have don't really have a lot of zoning that is amenable to that right now. Like, we do everything through a big rezoning process. That's essentially what we're doing. Like, with the exception of the part around Wilson Crescent, which is zoned multiple family, everything else is comprehensive development zones, rezoning. So it might have limited applicability here, and we might have to rely more on some of the other things. Or if there are recommendations to include density bonusing in sort of a different format as compared to maybe what other jurisdictions do when they already have, a layer of zoning that existing builders and developers can build within. So those were sort of the two things that stood out for me on that, but.
Take the first one.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So in terms of the PEAH, the Perpetually Affordable Housing Income Limits and Rental Rates, as a baseline number, we use the BC Housing income limits, and then the maximum monthly rents were based on a 30% of those income limits for a monthly rent. So I think it's important at the outset to establish those maximums, but you're right, I think more work needs to be done to just iron those out and build those out further to make sure they capture the purpose of what we want these units to, or who we want these units to serve, so for sure.
But I think you're right, there are examples of ranges being provided because as Devin said, we base this off the 2017 hills, which we all know are subject to change quite a bit. Actually, in the last 5 years, they've changed a lot. So maybe we'll consider a bit more of a range and maybe more of an average on some of the past hills limits as well. Yeah.
And I think, if I remember some of our conversations, preliminary conversations with BC Housing, is they've suggested that funding might be able to adjust some of those. It's not a commitment on their part, but they've suggested that there might be funding that might allow us to lower those, maybe. Or that remains to be seen when and if we get final project commitment.
And I also, one other thing that we might want to consider, and maybe that's more at the project development stage, particularly for Carson Place project, is sort of determining, I don't know what the industry best practice is, but around utility provision for the affordable housing units, because in the existing one project that we have in Squamish, everything is baseboard electric and electric hot water, and the tenant is responsible for that, and that actually can be a very significant added cost beyond the rent. So wondering if there are some practices. I know I've seen some really crazy stuff in other jurisdictions where they have almost complete passive houses, but even if there's more of a sort of option around, the primary thing that people do right now in new builds is gas, right? Natural gas is really more affordable compared to electric, but I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't know
No,
if
that's
that was part
a good,
of
that's a really astute comment. What we've tried to do both from the development side and the policy side is make broad enough recommendations that are going to position you for any programs that come. So for example, the Hills limits of BC Housing, current programs, 40% of the units have to be at Hills rents or below for BC Housing to come to the table, just as an example. Similarly, if they're at the table, we're building to the new energy step code, which is a bit more towards passive. It's very envelope focused. So you're right, there'll be a bit more money spent up front on your project. It'll be a solider project with hopefully more simplified mechanical systems than maybe the LEED process was historically. So it'll be easier for you to own and operate. But on the flip side, BC Housing still requires us to individually utility each unit in the building. So individual hot water tanks, things like that, which have pros and cons. It can be a pain to operate and maintain individual tanks. But let's say in 10 years there's an affordable home ownership program and you want to maybe stratify some of those units and put them out to market or something, it gives you that flexibility as well, right? So we're trying to think about all the possible permutations and develop something that positions you for that, I'd say. But that's good, yeah, kind of operational based knowledge that we want to try and incorporate in the design.
Yeah, I think one of the first things we'll need to do with design is figure out what step or what green building program we're going to want to follow.
Yeah.
Be a bit of a cost increase, but then your operating costs are consequently less. Just going back to the density bonusing question, I think we'll have to answer those during the zoning bylaw review. We've already figured out that that's a huge piece of the project that needs to get done.
Yeah, my druthers And I will, actually, the numbers, the rents, I'm just looking for the page,
Page 9.
22, or page
On page 9.
22 of 68. Monthly rent, that's not including utilities.
I mean, yeah, that number is not including utilities, no. Correct.
Yeah, and this is where I think Jason was going, or you guys were going. I just went to a passive apartment building in Ottawa where it's $29 a year per unit. Now, they're all bachelor units, $29 a year per unit. So the ROI, or the business case to build an efficient envelope is there. And when you think about, like, if you had $200 a month because you're heating with baseboard heaters, a badly insulated building, that could easily be, instead of $900 for a studio, $1,100 for a studio. So when we think of affordability, we want to make sure it's the entire cost of the month, not just the rental cost. So I'm of the mind we are at step 4 or even step 5. Why not? I mean, we should be building step 5 today anyway, but
Yeah.
I think we can have that conversation. I did want to bring up, Jason and I talked last week about affordable housing land reserve. And you don't really go into any detail or any, but I think that may be part of the strategy we want to make sure we're encompassing. You do talk a little bit about, acquiring crown land and sort of going after stuff, but I think it'd be nice to almost take it to the next level where we actually have a long-term strategy about how to keep building that land reserve for rental purposes in particular. I don't know if you want to elaborate it, Jason, at all, but.
So a bit of an acquisition plan? Are you thinking
An
acquisition?
acquisition strategy on municipal lands, but also crown lands and various other ways of big rezonings that we acquire pieces of land for rental or.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to know, like, when we get to that next layer about the pros and cons of the different types of housing management organizations, which one might work better, because I'm assuming that some of this stuff, if you are land banking and, you might, depending on obviously not for crown land, but if you're getting land, fee simple land from a developer at a big rezoning, you could leverage that land in terms of financing, because that land actually has value on the market and that kind of thing. So, and that's sort of where I think in Squamish is a big part of the puzzle, because land is quite scarce as far as reasonably developable land, and even in the future will be even more challenged in that way. So we definitely know that in order to achieve those sort of affordable rents, basically you gotta have free land of some sort, or land that's been acquired municipally. So I think it's really important to have those recommendations and what it might look like, and that might also help us in terms of a district approaching the other stakeholders, whether it be the province or developers, all of that, to say, well, we have a plan and this, we want, X amount of land or that kind of thing. And how do you tie the two together?
Okay.
So I'm curious about why a district-owned corporation sort of rose to the top in your minds. Philosophically, affordable housing has always belonged to senior levels of government. And I think a lot of municipal governments have stepped into the fray because we're the ones who field the complaints and deal with the crisis on the ground. And because senior levels of government stepped back from their mandate for so many years. But they are starting to step forward, and I wonder, you talk about it, sort of best practices, and is it really the role of a municipality to be the organization that owns that wholly owned body? Like, should we actually be responsible for housing? I think our job is to facilitate affordable housing, create the atmosphere to make it happen, make sure that our citizens can find homes. But it does make me nervous when we start to say, yeah, we'll form a corporation and actually manage housing. That makes me wonder if we're overstepping our mandate as a local government. I'd be curious to your thoughts.
Yeah. That's, I think a lot of municipalities are grappling with that exact same question. As things get devolved, similarly as gaps aren't being met with the existing nonprofits or whatever's happening in the community. So our understanding was when we came on board is There's a really strong social network of groups meeting, especially service kind of focused provision housing, but there was this gap just below market or the missing middle, whatever we want to call it. And that you had a piece of land or two and you saw an opportunity to help facilitate or support that. There's lots of different ways that you can approach this. It's a matter of how you want to own and operate the building and how you want to maintain and own the title or the project itself, right? So there's the asset piece and the operations piece. And that's what we've kind of teased out some different options for each. You can cut it a million different ways depending on your risk tolerance and maybe what your longer term vision is and that role that the municipality is going to play. So I'd say that might beg a much larger conversation about exactly how involved the municipality wants to be. So whether you're just an owner, maybe you're a land bank and you're providing those pieces of land and then you're opening up opportunities for other nonprofits or other societies, or you're, in this case, kind of being a bit of a developer for a first project to meet an immediate gap in the community. That would be my recommendation, is that you guys come up with a bit of a vision for it internally. There's no clear answer. But we see it, so many municipalities are in the exact same position, struggling to meet a community need, because you're right, you're at the face of it.
So I guess my question is then, is this what this next phase will tease out, is to have that conversation about where we...
It sounds like they're trying to get that direction from us now, so we're...
Well, to be honest, I thought we were sort of, it's not an if, it's a how. I thought the question remaining was a how question. How are we going to assume that role? Not if we're going to assume that role. I had assumed, based on past conversations and based on the work done today, is that it was how are we going to fulfill that role, whether it's corporation, society, or partnering agreement.
Or land bank, or all the other things that we're...
Oh, it could be part of, land that could be part of the corporation. It's not either or necessary.
Well, the part of the difficulty in stepping back now is we have the Buckley project on the go, on our land. So we're sort of into it now. We've passed that threshold by getting into designing a project on our land. So again, this is positioned around a how conversation, not an if conversation. So.
Thank you, Madam Edson. How we got here in terms of staff believing we're in a how conversation is originally direction from council was to hire a housing coordinator and do it internally. And what we proposed and council endorsed was doing a contract to see what is the best model as opposed to taking it on entirely as a staff member. And then the other direction was an actual project, so housing units on the ground, which is, to Gary's point, how we're here and believe we're at the how stage versus.
But to the point mentioned earlier, there's a difference between operating and owning assets. And so I believe that there is more conversation to be had about what is our role in terms of that function. And why wouldn't we just be really clear about we actually want an arm's length from that and don't want to be seen as building housing, like, so we fill the gap, but I don't see that as our long-term role to keep necessarily building housing. But providing land, providing waiving DCCs, providing policies to make sure affordable housing, but I don't see it perpetually building, being a developer in our own community. That's not my vision of this. We've filled a need in the immediate term, but I'm not, and what I'm saying is that at some point, is that our role now forever? Have we just taken on like a Whistler housing sort of thing? I'm not sure that that's what is in the best interest of the community. Someone else can do it better than us.
So I think we're perhaps in agreement then, is that I think that's the sort of decision that we're trying to make here with the next level of review, is what exactly is the best way for the district to be involved, either through corporation, society, or a partnering agreement is probably the, let's say, the least, I won't say invasive, but least, what's what's the word, involved. There is less sort of direct investment. If it's a corporation, it's a wholly owned corporation. If it's a society, it's somehow formed where we would be the sole owner operator of that society, or member of that society, controlling member of that society. Or a partnering agreement essentially, through that agreement, transfers that responsibility, and you can transfer ownership of. It's a little trickier through a partnering agreement to transfer assets. It's easy to do that through a society or a corporation.
But I guess that was my question is, does this next phase still provide us with the opportunity to discuss all those options? I don't need to decide that today because you said you weren't ready to bring a recommendation.
Correct. Yes, this next one will give council the decision, do you want to go within this range between a partnering agreement and a corporation, which one does council want to choose? We'll give you more information on those options.
Okay, good.
So I think, did we just agree?
I think we just
I think
agreed.
we did. Thank you.
Well, I didn't have my hand up, but I'll talk anyway. So,
Was it just, I'm sorry.
is it you?
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
I just say to offer a bit of a counterpoint. I'm kind of in the opposite camp. I think that we're going in the direction of Whistler as a community, and the reason I think that is because of the fact that geographically, even though people do commute to the city and whatnot, we're pretty isolated, and so unlike, say, a municipality in Metro Vancouver, where there's a whole panoply of responsibilities, I can understand why one municipality in, Metro Vancouver, for example, wouldn't want to form a housing corporation to take on all the housing needs of Lower Mainland. Totally get that. But I think in Squamish, we're a little bit unique, just like Whistler is unique, in that we have a scarcity of land. We also have a significant service-based employment sector, particularly in tourism, and these are the sectors of our economy that are forecast to grow the most. And so I don't see the need for that missing middle in the rental market. I don't see that going away anytime soon. I mean, even though we know that generally rental is getting a bit better for developers and they're starting to consider it, I don't think they're going to make units that actually rent out for that price point. And so to me, it's like, the Whistler model is actually, I think, fairly successful, and to me, a municipally owned corporation or something like that kind of gives you a bit more of a level of continuity in terms of planning and coordination, as well as accountability. It's direct accountability to the people of Squamish, and for me, it's more around, this is the number one issue that I hear about, and so I think there is an appetite for Squamish to be proactive, with the caveat of we're not going to be subsidizing operationally units. And when we were talking about that in the housing task force, there was general agreement even amongst the developer private sector folks that as long as we weren't actually like subsidizing and getting into the role of what BC Housing does with their core need housing and some other nonprofits, that was a role that we might be best able to fill as a local municipality. But I agree, it's not very common, but I also think that we're not a very common town. So I just leave that for consideration, and recognizing, of course, that there are two other councillors who are not here today right now, and they probably have varying opinions as well.
No. Doug, did you want to go too?
Sure. I've been flipping this governance thing around in my mind. I think when you start thinking about corporation versus society, I think Councillor Elliott's right. Part of it is kind of the vision and how you see this going forward, and what the municipality's role is going forward. And I can see pluses and minuses for both of them. They're both pretty quick to set up, by the way. I know I've been out of the practice for a while, but we used to be able to get a corporation to pay an extra fee, and we had numbers back in 48 hours. So the thing is that there's going to be, because it will be either a municipal corporation or it will be a housing society, there will be a certain amount of customization. You won't be taking articles off the shelf. But
a reasonably inspired law firm can get that over their office pretty quickly. So either way, it's relatively fast. Even SSC, you could use it today. It could sign a contract today with BC Housing. There's nothing to prevent it from doing that in the Business Corporations Act. And we might want to go back and make sure it is compliant with municipal affairs or with the ministry for a municipal corporation. But it could happen relatively quickly. But to me, the issue then is going forward, what's the role of the district? And I think you'd have more control through a corporation, because a corporation can have one shareholder. Society, the last time I looked in the new legislation, I think they have at least 3. And so society is more, in my mind at least, is more given over to community groups, where you have different people coming together with a common purpose on a non-profit basis. And the report has examples, I think, 4 of them that are around, and there's probably a couple more. So if we're going to be involved, the company's as good as any, I guess, and we can deal with the financing issues either way. But then going forward, when this whole thing bubbled up initially, for me, the idea was, well, maybe we'll build something, but more likely we're going to get control of units through the development process in some form. And we've talked about in different developments, there's some possibilities that we'll actually get title to some units. There's other possibilities we'll hold covenants, and the developer will retain titles to units, or they'll be sold to a person who will put them into sub-market housing or something and manage them in that way. But we're going to have a management role to ensure that all this is done. And so I think that ongoing, whether it's our standalone building, we might own it, or the company might own it. The question is, who's going to manage it? That to me is, and how do we get to that point? And it might be that building, and it might be half a dozen units in this development over here, and some units over there, and we might own a couple of units over here, and we might have covenants against 40 or 50 units throughout the municipality. How are we going to deal with that going forward? And a company, from my perspective, is fine. That's okay. But I think it's kind of figuring out our role going forward for these different, call it different levels of housing. I think there's going to be a limit to how much we're going to build as a district, only because we only have a certain amount of land. And it doesn't become available all the time unless the Crown opens up land for us and we're able to get it on a Crown grant process or something like that. But to go out into the market and buy a big chunk of land right now, very expensive in Squamish, and same as everywhere else. So I don't think that's likely to happen. I think we went into this one because nobody else was. Developers weren't stepping up to build something like that. Now you hear rumblings, and Gary will know better than I will, but there's now applications for an entire building of sub-market housing, for example. So that's great. I don't care who owns it, whether it's us or the developer, as long as we're the ones controlling who actually lives there. And that to me is the important thing. So for me, that's our role going forward, is ensuring that control. And it's probably not anybody that's working for the district today. It's property management skills, which were in residential, which we're not in the business of today. So either we contract it out or we start hiring people that have that expertise, and they work for the company or they work for the district. It doesn't really matter.
Thanks. Just cognizant of time, we did a special, supposed to start about now. So we can go a little bit longer on this. Generally speaking, I think I was well along the way along where Councillor Buckenwolf and Councillor Race have gone in terms of we're going to have that entity that starts managing units, that starts strategizing with partners, that maybe sets up a land bank system to move forward. And I do think you're out of the special, Councillor. And there's all sorts of great societies in the community that are already doing the core needs housing, and that's certainly not where I think our corporation, if it ends up being that, would want to go. So can you just go back to the recommendations? Just so we're...
I don't know that we have the motions on the screen.
This was right?
Right.
So we have a couple here that the motion, accept the final report, I think that's fairly easy to do, that the district authorized Mayor and Chief Financial Officer to execute the BC Housing Letter of Understanding and promissory note, that the District Squamish Council approve an extension to the existing services contract, that the district approve the extension of the existing contract for the other stuff. I don't want to read the whole thing. And that the district staff issue an RFP for project management services for the Buckley Avenue project. Now, my only caution is that I don't want to preempt any public hearing on this for some of these things. So this is a committee meeting. May I suggest it just doesn't come back for council ratification until after the public hearing?
These motions.
Mhm.
Or this, do you want to do the first
We can do the first couple, but
few and then, just separately?
Well,
Hold on.
The public hearing.
Rezoning.
there's a rezoning on this
Yeah.
property we're talking about.
Oh,
When is that anticipated?
I was just thinking that.
First, second reading's just been moved to May 1st.
Second reading is May 1st.
You're mumbling, I can't hear, I'm sorry.
Sorry, second reading has been moved to May 1st. So public hearing would be May 15th.
Middle of May. Yeah.
So we really need to get this RFP out long before that. Unless we, in terms of, sorry.
So walk
I
me
didn't
through
finish
this,
my
if
sentence.
for whatever reason council doesn't approve this after the public hearing.
I would suggest that we word the RFP such that the contract's not taking effect
Okay.
until
Yeah.
Thank you.
the rezoning is done.
Sorry, I didn't finish my thoughts.
That's what I wanted to hear. Okay. So someone wants to move all of those, moved by Councillor Blackman-Wolf, second by Councillor Kent. Any further discussion? Just on that, can we get some sort of land bank language into the report somehow to sort of contemplate a little bit more than just simply acquiring crown lands in the future kind of thing? A little bit more of a thought about how that may look. Would be good. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
work. And that, part of that motion was, and that it be contingent or not executed until,
It's clearly on
conditional.
conditional on, subject to,
Oh, that's good.
don't do nothing until,
Substitute is fine, conditional is much more official sounding.
thank you, doctor.
Lawyer.
I think a doctor was a lawyer was a doctor. What was the, okay,
All of them out, don't you?
what's the title?
I have a bachelor of laws, but some people get a doctorate of jurisprudence.
Oh, wait, you're not. Okay, moving on, we are at our procedural bylaw. Oh, sorry, before we go on to that, we did get a letter from our MP with regard to a bunch of stuff that was in the 2018 budget. But a few of this, so we're still on, maybe, can we get our affordable housing people back? Sorry. Sorry, brain fart. I said fart and fart.
It's not the effort, don't worry.
Sorry, we're gonna ask them, everybody to come back. Sorry, can McCullough come back too? Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, we got this letter yesterday, and just wanted to make sure it was part of the conversation about affordable housing. So it was a letter from our MP outlining some of the things that were tabled in the 2018 budget. And I just wanted to make sure that we have these financing initiatives in our minds, and making sure that we're taking advantage of these things within the context of our strategy. I don't know if you've had a chance to dig into the federal government stuff?
Yeah, we have. Maybe I'll provide you a little bit of an update from our knowledge on the
Excellent.
federal and maybe the BC housing side
That
as well.
would be great too.
So this rental construction financing initiative rolled out last year, and it is for all rental construction, so both private sector and public sector. So McCullough actually didn't apply for any of it last year because it actually got eaten up within 3 months, predominantly by the private sector. It's a 10-year construction financing deal with CMHC. There's pros and cons to it, like anything. Some of our clients who are more risk adverse didn't want to enter into just a 10-year financing situation. But obviously they're increasing the dollars. And so the way we're currently developing out your pro forma on the capital and operating side is to position the Carson Place project for federal or provincial financing. So we are keeping something like this in the back of our minds. So as Gary mentioned, we've just got about 145,000 in preliminary development funds from BC Housing. We had a very good meeting with Naomi, the regional director, I think it was in December maybe. She's very supportive of your project. You would be a great proponent because you are a district, you own the land, you've got some, we've done quite a bit of work to date. So they issued that funding. As Gary mentioned, we can go after that another couple times before we reach that final project commitment if we decide to go down the BC Housing route. Because we got that preliminary development funding, we are not required to bid on whatever RFP the province is going to issue in April or May. We're anticipating a big call to come out at the provincial level. We have heard it's going to be a rolling call between now and the end of the year, and that there'll be various targeted populations throughout that call. So we do know seniors, and we know women fleeing violence, and there's another targeted group that'll be this year. If there happens to be a missing middle below market group, we're open to bid on that, but we basically have our foot in the door already with BC Housing because of that preliminary development funding. So,
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would just say, yeah, I guess maybe it'd be good for our staff, as soon as we kind of know what pot we're going for council to know, so that we can go knock on the door of either our member of parliament or our MLAs and, you know, remind them about the project and encourage them to speak with their counterparts too. You know, because it definitely happens more at staff level for sure, but sometimes it's more of a ministerial decision of to where to allocate some resources. So I think we want to be proactive as local electeds to lobby our counterparts.
yeah, for sure. And in our next report, where we're building out those three options in more detail, we will outline the potential limitations or opportunities at the federal and provincial level for those options, because some of them will be more flexible or tuned to some of those opportunities than other entities, right?
Any other questions about this letter? I have one more question, it's a little off topic. It was brought up at a conference I was at this weekend. Is there an opportunity to earmark through this Carson Place children that are aging out of foster care or that system into this housing? And there may be some subsidy. I mean, you talked a little bit about that, some subsidy from the province on that, but is it worthwhile exploring that with this project?
We've talked a little bit through our conversations with the SIHSG group that there's already some service providers in the area that are working in an area such as that. So it might be an easier way to achieve that same goal might be to work with them in partnership for a number of units. They have the right to 5 units. They meet the rents that we need to make the overall project budget work. And then they work through accessing that funds for those folks aging out of care.
And, yeah.
So I have had some conversations with Sea to Sky and then Sea to Sky with MCF, Ministry of Child and Family Services. The Barclay project isn't suitable to youth under 18.
I agree with that,
but it's certainly possible for that target group between sort of 19 and 26 that, yeah, if the income support programs are there, absolutely they could find their way into this project.
I had another question, but
One thing I forgot to mention, going back to the actual report, the report didn't cover anything around, I was wondering, potential partnerships and, you know, not for Carson Place because we're already too far along on that, but over the long term, again, for a housing corporation in Squamish, if we go that route, how to partner and access funds for Indigenous housing off reserve, because that's definitely, you know, just a growing segment in our community, living off reserve, and if there are special funds available that can help make projects work together, we might be in a position to do that. Because I know when I talk to Squamish Nation, you know, one of their challenges is that in the Squamish Valley, they have 400 members, right? So looking at the economies of scale for them, like they can't do their own off-reserve project on their own, but maybe, you know, 6 or 7 units, yeah.
That's a great point, and that is the third target group, thank you,
Yeah.
that is coming out with BC Housing. And so the group of us have been talking about that as well, and we've been reaching out and looking at developing a relationship and bringing the nation up to speed, at least with this project as well. And maybe it ends up being an opportunity for a certain amount of units or another project down the line. But thank you, it is on our radar.
And another thing, and maybe we're getting ahead of it too, we want to get through public hearing, is that we want to ensure that these units are going to people who are employed locally and figure out a system whereby we're ensuring that people that are employed locally are getting opportunity for reliable, affordable rental. And not just
That's
That's the
PHH.
perpetual affordable housing policy will do exactly how council wants to target the units that the district controls.
awesome. Right, thank you
Thanks
for
so
coming
much.
back.
Yep.
Procedural bylaw, and actually I'm going to just suspend this meeting briefly and going to open up the special business meeting. We have agenda of the special business, moved by Councillor Bucknell, seconded by Councillor Pryor. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Motion to close. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Bucknell. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries, and we're suspended. I don't want to come back and close it. We're suspended now. Back in this one. I love playing these silly games.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Charlene Pollock. I'm the Manager of Legislative Services, here to talk about the procedure bylaw amendments. So as you know, the procedure bylaw establishes the general procedures to be followed by council and council committees in conducting meetings. And the bylaw is meant to be reviewed on a yearly basis and updated as required. I've been making notes of amendments the last over a year. The bylaw was last updated in May 2015, and following first 3 readings, the community charter requires that the bylaw be advertised in 2 editions of the newspaper outlining the proposed changes before it may be adopted. And there is some urgency with amending the bylaw due to the change in date for the local government elections. So the inaugural meeting date has been changed to the first meeting in November from December. And the report outlines the amendments in the bylaw, including a number of changes and additions to the order of business. There's now a section for late agenda items, and a specific section for staff updates that are just for information. And we've added in a section regarding electronic submissions for public hearings to make it clear the due date for email electronic submissions is 4 o'clock on the date of the hearing. That's generally in the public hearing notice, but good to have it in the procedure bylaw as well. And we will continue to accept correspondence by hand at the hearings as people submit them. And there are a couple clauses, one regarding hearing from a developer or members of the public at committee meetings, and a clause regarding hearing from the developer at first reading consideration of an OCP or zoning amendment. And both of those clauses they're may clauses, so it's not a requirement. And there was discussion about including both of those at earlier council meetings. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about consent agendas. I had been requested to do some research about this. So I looked at a number of procedure bylaws from other municipalities. I looked at, I think about 14. And about half have consent agendas. So items typically considered on consent agendas include receipt of minutes, correspondence, and staff reports for information. What I found was some municipalities allow consent agenda items to be listed at the discretion of the CAO and the corporate officer in consultation with the mayor. So that would be for inclusion of items that require little or no discussion. Items listed under the consent agenda may be considered for approval by council in one motion unless a member of council would like the item debate, and then that would need to be excluded from the consent agenda and considered as a separate agenda item. So there's no need for a complete separate agenda. The consent agenda would be one item on the regular council agenda, and then the items within the consent agenda listed underneath. So if council would like consent agenda included, I'd have to further amend the procedure bylaw to include that in there.
So yeah, I asked Char to look into this a bit. We've adopted it up at the SLRD, and it's just how efficiency. Members can still, all the resolutions that come out of minutes are still done separately, and if a board member wants to discuss anything, it's just simply pulled through the consent agenda and dealt with on a one-off basis, but it just helps it so at the end of the day, I'm not having to talk about every minutes of every meeting I've ever done and reciting it all. So on the consent agenda, just that piece, everyone sound all right to everybody? So yeah, we'd like something added. I did have a question about, to get us a way, at the SLRD as well, let's say we have a board meeting and then we have a hospital district meeting. What the procedural bylaw allows is to say a time or immediately following that meeting. So we don't have to suspend a meeting and do a motion and blah, blah, blah. So it'd be nice to have something in the procedural bylaw that sort of says, here's the time. It is either at this time, within the 30 minutes, or immediately following the preceding meeting. So we don't have to do this rigmarole of closing and opening and suspending meetings.
If I might, Robin Arthurs, General Manager, Corporate Services. We looked into this at the last time we did the amendment. And I think the difference is between the regional districts are governed, their meeting procedures are governed under the Local Government Act, and we're under the Community Charter, and the language for posting meetings is different. So we have to actually post a time for a start for our meetings. It can't be immediately following. It has to be a date, a time, and a place. And I think that might be the difference. So we're not in a position to do that.
I'm going to push back a little on that, because we post at the regional district, we post a time.
Yep.
But we also say or immediately following. So you can't start it before that time, and we do that. We can't unless there's unanimous vote of council. But it just is dumb the way we do it now.
And
Sorry.
I remember we did
know.
have this conversation, and I believe that the answer was that the difference it lays in the two governing legislations. One
It's
was
still dumb.
I hear you. So, maybe that's a motion for you to see. Yeah, it makes it a little bit more bureaucratic and restrictive, absolutely.
Can you show me that paragraph in the community charter?
It is.
Yeah, can we find the dumb clause?
Sure, do you want to rate this second, or do you want to?
Yeah, I'd like to see it. Councillor Elliott and Councillor.
So for a few additions to the agenda, so we talk about late agenda items, which I get, because sometimes there's letters and that sort of thing, but do we put some language around it that it can't be like a 50-page report that didn't quite meet the deadline, but we really, really wanted to discuss, and so then suddenly council's being asked to make a decision on a staff report that just came in. And so I kind of actually want to see a bit of language around there, like it can be a letter, it can be a verbal update on something, but I don't think it's fair to council to put a 50-page report that we haven't had time to read on a late agenda just because it didn't quite make the deadline.
Council can always simply say no.
That's
to
right.
Any late agenda.
The agenda would still be amended for the inclusion, and council would have the ability to not allow that amendment.
The other one, there's two more that I'm curious about. The addition in section 11 to allow committee chairs to hear from developers regarding the viability of development. So there's some developers who come in and they've actually mapped out a pretty thorough plan, and they're given time on the agenda to tell us that plan. And then recently we had a developer come in who had 2 pictures, no information on the page, and asked everyone to express an opinion so that he could determine whether to put in an application or not. So, like, bring Garibaldi Springs forward, or concepts on the Pac West building site, that makes sense to me. Forcing council to express an opinion with zero information, that's not cool. And so how do we distinguish between those two things? Is one because they'd already put in an application?
Mayor Heinzman, through you, we could add some parameters, and it is absolutely at the discretion of council and committees to hear. So it does say may, it's not
I'm just wondering from staff, we have had things come to CDC that are sort of cooked a little bit. And obviously staff have felt it was important to bring them forward to us. There was another developer who got 10 minutes on the agenda and didn't really have anything. And so where are we drawing the line between that and something that's more thorough?
Yeah, it's at the discretion of the mayor, or the acting mayor, whoever is determining delegate. If someone asks to be a delegation, the person doing, like either the mayor or the acting mayor, depending on the situation, can say yes or no to it, and can say which committee.
But through, it seems to be a difference because some of them have been more than a delegation. They're like, they have full time on the agenda, and then.
That's usually brought forward by staff to be on like the CDC committee agenda. This was a delegation request that came through our delegation request system. They came through different systems. So, I'm not saying it's right, I'm just saying that.
That one doesn't feel right. And then lastly.
We could, no, just to go back, council could simply say, we can always override a policy, but we could have a policy whereby council does not want to see delegations from random developers, or however you want to word it.
Right.
Like in the request to appear process.
Well, can I just ask?
Yeah.
So when things like Pac West building site or Garibaldi Springs came forward to CDC, have they already submitted a application?
Yes, yes, both of them had, and I don't know whether we ever did this formally, but I think it was sort of an agreement at some point in the last 18 months that we would just bring sort of really significant rezoning development applications to Community Development Committee. Well, I'll say 500 units, so it's the big stuff. So that we don't, at Community Development, stack it with 16 applications each month from someone wanting FaceTime with council. See?
And that's my concern with the way it's worded here, is that if you have a chair that exercises lots of discretion, we end up with everyone sort of taking up our time testing their development idea before it's really necessary.
And that's why they were given 5 minutes, and council has discretion, say, go back to the process. Councillor Reese and Councillor Blackenmore from Councillor.
Well, it's on a different topic, but the December appears in 5.1 as well as 6.1.
Okay.
And the amending bylaw
Change
only
it in
refers
both.
to 6.1. 12.1.
Is that it?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure though how you, like, I see the point being made about, appropriate use of council's time. But it's also that when somebody applies to the delegation process, like if we don't have a very solid reason to reject something, then I think it's a little bit more challenging, and it may actually make things worse, because then, an applicant could go around the community saying, oh, they don't even want to hear from me at your council and whatever. And in my attempt at the meeting in question, as far as chair, what I tried to do, because I recognize that the applicant or the presenter was pretty aggressive in his approach around wanting opinions, and I feel that at that time I said to the applicant that, people are having no opinion is also an option, or having no vote or anything like that, that's also an option. And some members of council offered feedback, and others did feel comfortable doing that, and I think that was in my view anyway, I felt like that was okay. And I don't think we went a little bit over the time, but with Q&A, but I think it was like 15, 20 minutes. So I guess the moral of the story would just be that as long as we trust the chairs to kind of, you know, mediate that process, but we kind of do that anyway as far as any other delegation. And yeah, I don't know.
And
There's no easy answer.
it is up to the chair and mayor, the acting mayor, to say no to the delegation and revert to staff instead, or it's totally, but, you know, I think that Councillor Blackman Wolf was saying that discretion is there to determine is it worth it in 5 minutes to make something not an issue. Make another issue out of an issue. I've got Ted and Karen and Doug.
Well, there could be some minimal amounts of information provided, because if a delegate wants to come in and get some questions answered, you have to bring in the pertinent material so that someone can make an informed decision. Like a picture doesn't cut it. Possibly. So maybe something around information provided.
I'm going to go to Pete.
No,
Hasn't spoken yet.
And just to that point, I mean, perhaps that should be screened for the delegations to be able to see what they have, so they don't just come in and say, you know, I'm a delegation for such and such, but not having pre-provided the material that they intend to present. Let's have a look at it first. If you're coming in as a delegation, please provide whatever it is you want to show and speak on in advance, so we can judge whether it's worthy or not, or if it's prepared, as opposed to just one sheet of paper with a cartoon drawing on it.
Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. It's been good to hear people's different thoughts on this. I guess for me, anybody can come as a delegation at any time, and I'm not sure why we would put wording in there that's specific to developments. Because anybody can be a delegation on any topic at any time and approach the chairs. And so to me, it invites stuff we don't want to see. And even here, which I forgot was in here, was that if people want more than 5 minutes, it needs a 2/3 vote as a member of council. So in that particular circumstance, it went over time, but not because we all voted on it, it's just because that's where it went. No fault to the chair. I'm sure I've done the same thing, forgetting that that's in there. So to me, I like, why would we call it out? Because I think staff are doing a good job bringing us the most relevant projects that are big and that we feel, you know, require some pre-discussion before it comes before first reading. So to me, I think we should just be silent on that in the delegations and petitions and just leave it out.
Which one are you talking specifically about?
So this would be 11.7. We're talking about adding something
Oh, yeah.
that says the chairs have discretion to have developers come in and talk, but it's under delegations and it says right in there that they just have 5 minutes. So we just set ourselves up for a really difficult conversation when we say, okay, that's it, you only have 5 minutes, when you know they want much, much more than that. So I'd rather leave it to staff discretion, and the delegation can come and say, we'd like more time on an agenda, and then council can look at that in 5 minutes. But I don't think we should say
Specifically, yeah.
specifically to hear from the regarding the viability of the development. We can't do that in 5 minutes.
No, and that's not the intention of it, so.
That's the wording that's in
Yeah,
there.
no, and we should change that. No, I agree, sorry. Anyone disagree with that? Simply just taking that out?
5 minutes?
The
No.
specific 1312.
Not adding 11.
Addition to section 13 to allow the developer applicant to present and answer questions at.
No, not
oh,
that.
that's sorry.
The 11.7.
11.7. Adding to section 11 to allow committee chairs to hear from developer applicants regarding the viability of development. I think I generally agree it should just come through staff. And if they want to come through the application with peer process, it might be, you know, sent to a different committee or a committee of the whole meeting. And that just is done through the one process, and it's 5 minutes. Unless the committee or council says otherwise. Gary, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, rather than sort of, the way I've seen it done before is that council doesn't hear or doesn't typically hear or generally hear, however, on issues where there's an administrative procedure set up to deal with that issue, so whether it's a permit or parking ticket or whatever, that if there's a process set up to deal with that issue, like an application, go through that process. Don't subvert that process as a delegation of council. That's the way I've sometimes seen it done, so that's an option. Rather than saying, no, the developers, it's, if there's another process for you to follow, follow that one.
And every so often a delegation comes to my desk and I say, why doesn't someone talk to that person before they come and do that? So that does on occasion happen. But I think I agree with Councillor Elliott. You just take that line out. If you pass to a delegation, it's up to the discretion of the mayor and chair, depending on who's convening the meeting, to determine whether or not they appear on the agenda. They get 5 minutes. I think we need to be a little more diligent about saying after 5 minutes, or if we say 10 minutes, then after that amount of time, council then says, do we want to continue? And if there's a 2/3 vote to continue a little longer, then like, but actually be very clear about the timing of it. But that's a discipline issue, not a bylaw issue. Is everyone in agreement we should just take that clause out on this clause, Councillor Rice?
Well,
Which isn't in yet, but would be in.
yeah. Well, I think so, because if I take Gary's point that we have another, I forget the name, but we have a bylaw for procedure through rezoning, for example. And that to me is where developers get their day in front of council. And if it doesn't provide for it, we should provide, because we've said to staff since I've been on council, we want to see the big developments, and we also want to see not just large developments, but developments that have some contentious issue or some particular sensitivity before it goes to the bylaw process. We want to have a chance to kick it around the committee for a while. And that's not a 5-minute discussion typically.
No,
So, but that's staff bringing it to us. That's not a delegation in my mind.
No.
And we book the time necessary, period. The problem I see with this is what's happened is that if the developer comes at first reading and lays out the developer's thing, then in addition to staff presenting on it, that's fine, because it's like the staff presentation at the start of the bylaw process. But the problem then is the public all wanting to speak, and it turns into a public hearing or a debate, which is not really, in my mind at least, is not really the place to have that. So I think we have to be clear if we're going to allow that at first reading, whether it's in the other bylaw or whether it's in this one, that that's it, and the public speaks at the public hearing. And we don't have people just popping out of the audience with the last thought on their mind kind of thing. So, because that's where we had it turned into some of them just valid delegations.
So let's focus on 1111, or the proposed 1111.7, which is allow committee chairs to hear from developed applicants. I think that just goes through the normal agenda process. I don't think we need that line in there. Char?
Can I just make a comment? So I think the reason that this came about wasn't through the people filling out a delegation request. It was people putting up their hand in the audience to speak when there's a presentation.
But procedurally at committees, it's open to the chair, committee's discretion to invite anyone to speak. I don't think that's even necessary.
Well, and also, if I may, partly to, if there's a group, to limit it to one speaker and having that wording in the procedure bylaw.
Can we add in a fine for any councillor who takes a phone call in the middle of a meeting? Couldn't help myself, I'm sorry. So 11.7, anyone have a problem just not having that included? Okay. So back to 13.12, and that was the one that Councillor Grace was speaking to. Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, I would be okay with 1312 if it just said allow the developer to answer questions at first reading, but I don't think the developer should be allowed to present. I think our staff presents, but the developer can be there to answer questions, because I think that is helpful. But if we give them room to present, we could set up a they said, we said kind of thing. I don't want to put staff in that position. So yes to questions, no to present, in my opinion.
That's it. Councillor Pryor, we added something to procedure bylaw. Councillor takes a phone call during a committee meeting.
I've just got an eye operation lining up and they just canceled it, so I said, yahoo!
So anyone, I agree with Councillor Elliott. So to take out the 2% and just say, can answer questions of council at first reading. Everyone okay with that, please? Okay, Councillor Buckingham? That was. Any other specific things you want us to comment on, Cheryl?
No, nothing specific, just if there's anything else council would like to see amended or added to procedure bylaw.
Yeah.
Just a general question. I mean, technology is advancing, and one day we might have a really swish council chambers with technology that works. But, like, is there room to, I know we've got wording in here that only one councillor can, join electronically, but only for special meetings. But do you foresee a time where councillors can join electronically to both committee meetings and more than one possibly? I'm just thinking for those of us who are trying to both work and fulfill council duties, and sometimes you need to be in the city for the morning and maybe for the evening, but you've got a committee meeting in the afternoon. So how do you join? And I don't think we have the technology in here to do it, but is there anything in the local government act that
The
prevents
community
it?
charter does allow for electronic council meetings and not just electronic participation. We haven't included that.
Yeah, no, the community charter isn't the problem
Yeah.
here. Our procedural bylaw doesn't allow it. But it could, because the community
It
charter
could.
does.
The procedure bylaw could be amended. Right now, I believe, it's
Then we could just have dummies sitting in our seats.
one
And-
council.
And right, if I might,
I was waiting for that one.
I come back if you had to say it.
I'm looking right at the community charter, and it is for participation on special council meetings. So that means it would only be a special or committee of the whole, because committee of the whole is considered a special meeting under the charter. It doesn't apply to regular council meetings.
Which I understand, I get regular
Yes, it
council meetings, but would it apply to like our standing committees?
I would suspect it might. I would have to look into that a little bit more, but I would suspect that would be okay as well, that a committee meeting would be okay.
And I think some communities have, they can participate, but they don't count towards quorum. So they at least try to get 4 people in the room. Type of thing.
That would definitely have to be in the procedure bylaw. You'd need to be able to set some rules around that, because you can't participate like you said. And that would be really hard, I think, for council members to just sit and listen. And not
No, they can participate, they just don't count towards quorum. You have to have at least quorum in the room,
Yeah.
is what I'm saying.
For committee meetings, is that what you're referring to?
Not you mean that specific.
It makes more sense to be the other way.
Yeah,
Or if
because
you have quorum, I see what you're
it
saying.
may be needed for quorum.
So, yeah, someone who's interested, like when you're away and we've allowed that in the past. We've allowed you to.
There's 2 intentions here. One is to get quorum, absolutely. The other is to ensure there's at least a certain amount of people in a room. And the value of actually face-to-face democracy in that sense. So I'm saying there's 2 intentions of how other local governments are presenting these procedures.
The other thing is council's the one who set the threshold at what?
Well, this bylaw sets
At
it.
2, okay, it's at 2.
This bylaw sets it as per council direction.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So it wasn't anywhere coming out of the charter.
So, Councillor Elliott, are you proposing a modification to that at this point, or?
You know what, I think if I propose a modification, it would have to come with budget, because I've done some of the special meetings by conference call, and it's virtually impossible. We don't have good enough technology to actually make it functional. So if we were willing to invest a bit more, but I think the next council should certainly look at the procedure bylaw and So from a family-friendly position, like when my kids are sick and I have to be at home, it doesn't mean I don't want to participate in the meetings. I could still, if we had good technology, I could hear what was going on when anybody at the table spoke. I would call in from home, for sure. In conflicts when I have to choose between work and council, that's really difficult to miss a committee meeting, but I also have to, pay my mortgage. So, but if I had the option to call in when I'm in the city to be able to attend committee level, that would be really helpful. Of course, I would always be there for regular business meetings, but it's just right now, we don't have the table technology or the bylaw that allows for that flexibility for some councilors, and it'd be nice to get there. But I don't know how much
I would argue we do have the technology.
I mean, not the phone we use.
We've had those.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we need to use like, get an add-on or something like that, because I know the speakerphone that we use, I've seen other models where there's wires coming out of it and each person gets their own sort of mic all around the table, and I think that's something we could do probably within our existing budget or within our existing tech.
Sure.
So we can amend the procedure bylaw to include committees. I would suggest council committees, not outside committees.
Mhm.
If that's what council.
Everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
Any other pieces that are problematic?
Can we get a motion to upgrade the phone?
Robin had something.
So regarding notice and posting of meetings, it's section 126 and 127 of the community charter, notice of council meetings. And so council must make available to the public a schedule of the date, time, and place of regular council meetings, and give notice of the availability of the schedule in accordance with section 94, which talks about how we have to publish it once a year, the whole calendar, which we do on the agenda.
Yeah.
126 is special council meetings, and that's special meetings and committee of the whole.
Yeah.
And it talks about it being in accordance with section 127. Of course, the exception to that is when there's an all quorum attending and you waive notice. So I will take it away and look further for notes that we had from the last 2 years ago discussion, because I really don't remember. I will pull it out and we'll do another double check of it.
And if it's a simple line, it says the meeting will start at 2:15 or immediately following a preceding meeting.
Mhm.
So we don't have to do this word.
Well, and it may be that it applies to the standing committees, which would even help. So I'll take that away now.
Okay, good, thanks. Anything else, council, committee? Don't see anything, so did you want a motion? That staff bring forward, I'm not sure, you have a few amendments you want to make. so
Probably not the next, maybe an upcoming council.
Okay, I don't even know if you need a motion.
I
Just-
don't
Just
need
bring it back to an upcoming council meeting when it's ready. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much. That it? We done? Motion to terminate. Moved by Councilor Elliott, seconded by Councilor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries.